Hi, this is Arik,
And Aurelia,
and we're here to talk about life and interesting things.
or so we think, but in the end, we leave that up to you.
Either way, what we have to talk about is
Ageless!
In the last episode, we spoke about acceptance, and you gave us this kind of archetypal journey of how it begins with the Empress, how she's about acceptance, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And why is that? Just to refresh us.
Because the Empress represents the archetype of unconditional and unconditioned love.
Right, so you went through this nice journey, then how the next one was the archetype of the emperor who comes after the empress. And this was about then having the bigger picture. So I want to dedicate this episode about having a bigger picture. And I think we typically know what a bigger picture is, but I think sometimes the question arises that how big does your picture need to get in order to have a sufficiently big enough picture?
That's a very, very funny question. And I can see where it's coming from, but this is coming actually from being used to just having a small picture. Because this is like if somebody thinks that way, then all that means is that they do not have a big picture at all, but they want to be in control at any cost. And so they would say, well, I'm gonna go through all the efforts and I'm gonna accept, and so I can have the big picture, but really it's just a projection of the ego.
Tell me the minimum size in square meters of how big my picture needs to be in order to have what you call the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Because, I have to open my mind to get the bigger picture. But I mean, how much open do I have to do this? Like, we're just talking just a little door crack, or do I have to really? So, anyhow, I think then you can tell us, like, oh, there's our pizza. So hold on just a second.
We were talking about the bigger picture, and I can tell you exactly how big my bigger picture is, if that question still stands.
Yes.
Because the biggest picture you can have is like let's call it like to see the tree in the seed. That's what it means to have the big picture.
That's beautiful. So that's like you see the purpose of something.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And you see it as whole.
So if you're going through a rough time or even a good time, I think so many times we get lost in good times.
Yes.
That in a way it's like when we're going through a rough time, like we try to find the purpose, try to get the bigger picture. But when we're in good times, how often are we looking for the bigger picture? Or is that weird?
Like that we're doing that, or that you talk about it?
No, that we should that we should look for the bigger picture at all times.
At all times, because that archetype, or let's say that connection between the Empress and the Emperor that we have just now been talking about, that doesn't just disappear only because we have a good time. But it's, good times or bad times, it really doesn't matter. Like, we always should have the biggest picture, and that's always to see the tree in the seed.
So what does that mean? Elaborate on that, the tree and the seed.
Well, that means that you act in a certain way, and then you know instantly, well, pretty much instantly, what the outcome of this action can be, or actually will be. And of course, with our conditioned mind, this is fruitless. We do not even have to try. Because this is then what happens. Then, like from a false foundation, we try to expand. And that's just not working. This is like, I mean, again, then in the tower, eventually, in the journey, eventually we come to the tower when we have done this for another like 10, 11, 12 archetypes or stops on the journey. And then everything that we have made bigger without really having the big picture.
You're talking about like the
crumble.
procession of the archetypes in the Cosmic Pixels journey.
Yes.
Just, so that we know what you're talking about.
Yes.
Which is, we've talked about it a couple times in the podcast, but this is like a journey of what?
Well, these are stations.
I like it, stations. Yes.
Yeah, you can call it stations, but because a station would work if we talk here our day-to-day life, but it happens on all levels. Like if we talk about very tiny things, then it's no longer a station, but then it's can be just a flicker of energy, but it's a sequence of things. That's, I guess, the best I can come up with.
Okay, cool. That's really abstract, but
a sequence of things, big or small, it doesn't matter. Like we have man-made sequences of things, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is a man-made sequence, or we have A, B, C, D, E, that's a man-made sequence, and then there's like this archetypal sequence that just is and always was.
Wow, man-made sequence. I mean, this is really mind-blowing to think about that. Like to say it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in A, B, C, D, E and in its respective languages all across the world is man-made. Is like to say this in the age of Aquarius at this point in 2022, to say that this is a man-made thing really puts things into perspective, because it's true, but it's also something that we've gotten used to in terms of getting lost in the little details and not seeing the tree and the seed.
Exactly. Because we base all our experiences and our truths on these man-made foundations that just, when you really have the big picture, mean nothing. Because, I mean, there were times, and yes, it's like tens of thousands of years ago, there was no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right.
There was no A, B, C, D, E, not in any language.
But there always was.
Yes.
The journey.
Yes, there always was the journey, and you know how we like to prove that for anybody who, wants to dispute that, is that even tens of thousands of years ago, there was a mother.
Right.
And tens of thousands of years ago, there was a father. And, even though it may have looked different, like the nurturing quality that we ascribe to a mother was always there. Even if the mother was the whole village or tribe or whatever you call it, it was that energy of what we call the empress, of this, ideally unconditioned love.
So would you say that then the empress and the emperor are like the alphas?
Yes.
So then unconditioned love and acceptance is a quality of being an alpha.
Yes, absolutely. Beautiful said. Thank you.
Because I think in today's world, we don't think of alpha as that.
Yeah.
But in terms of these alpha qualities, the emperor then looks at the empress, as we're talking about the tree and the seed, and sees the alpha and the omega.
Yes.
And like how inside of that there is this purpose of creation.
Yes.
And how we can become like these co-creators.
Yes.
With these energies,
yes.
With with God, really.
Yes.
And I think this is really interesting and very important to know, to not get lost in like these little like these other kinds of sequences
Yes.
that then cause us to lose the whole sequence
And thereby the bigger picture.
and the big picture, the biggest picture.
Yeah.
I think that's also really important all the time, but especially now.
Yes.
That we have to keep our eyes on having like a bigger picture, even within our own lives, but also as a collective.
I probably would think that in the past it was easier to have the bigger picture because we were not so digitalized, for lack of a better word. You know, we were
I
more
agree.
grounded, and
Yeah.
we were really everybody was working with their hands one way or the other. A lot of people were actually really working with seeds and then, the stages of growth and fruit. So it was sort of easier to not get lost in these man-made sequences. And I mean, I'm not preaching that illiteracy is a great thing, but a lot of people were illiterate and they were yet close
self-resourceful.
Yes,
because
exactly.
I think a lot of times we think that we can pull out our devices and then we're getting a bigger picture by looking things up and searching for things, but I think it's really more compartmentalizing.
Yes.
Because it's I mean, even I remember the days before we had these things in our pockets, and we used to, like, honestly, to God, get bored. And not just reactively, when we feel boredom coming on, just whip out our thing and then, like, swiping and scrolling and
still be bored, but not being
and still
aware
bored,
of
but
it.
at least we're doing something and not going into the state of boredom where then you can get inspired.
Yes.
Where you can figure things out and say, okay, what do I want to do? And
because if you imagine that boredom is ruled by the crown chakra, then that tells you a lot.
What do you mean?
That means like the energy of boredom lives in our crown chakra. Yeah.
So like if you're bored, you don't have the bigger picture. You don't see the purpose of what you're doing.
Yes.
And with don't get me wrong, I love my devices
so
and everything.
I
mean, I'm not dogging on it, but just like the way that we use it, we have to be mindful of it.
Yes.
But I think like if you are,
it has to be balanced.
It has to be balanced.
Like what I need to say that.
Yeah,
like
go
with
ahead.
everything else, it needs to be balanced.
Yeah, and so I think like you have to, like if you whip out your phone and then like you think you have a purpose, but you satisfy the need for finding purpose by distracting yourself without really finding the purpose for something that you're doing.
Yes. And so hence, like going back to where this started, like before, like people were getting lost in these man-made sequences. They were closer to nature, and the Empress also is nature, and like all stages of growth and flowers and harvest.
I mean, you even saw it
so,
in professional industries, like how there's been a shortage of farmers.
Yes, sadly.
Because of many reasons, but you see, like, God forbid, like food shortages and stuff like that, like many consequences that come from having a shortage of farmers.
Many. I mean, don't get me started. I mean, talking about that there's just nobody there to really produce. It's also like the deterioration of soil. And I mention this because I read somewhere it is like soil month this month, and
nice,
which makes sense, with Earth Day and everything.
Taurus.
Like how, yes, exactly. So, how our soil is being destroyed in many, many, many ways, but then not having healthy farming is one of those ways. Because, I mean, I don't know if you remember that, but when there was a time when we were flying a lot and then when we would fly into Germany and to Bavaria, like to land in Munich, then there were like all these little squares of fields, and then there were like little stands of forest dividing it and everything. And that's like part of healthy farming, where you have like small fields, and they are protected by some sort of bushes or tree lines or whatever, so that when winds come or rain, that then the soil is not being swept away. Or like with these huge fields that we have like in the States, where there is like no nutrition left. Because there's like total over farming. And why is that possible? Because there are no people doing it.
Yeah, it's like, a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to literally get their hands dirty.
Nobody wants to work.
And nobody needs to do it anymore, because you buy like a big machine, and one person can do a whole field that gave work to 50 people like 100 years ago in 2 days.
Yeah.
But the cost is our soil, the quality of our soil, thereby the quality of our food, thereby going back to the archetype, our degraded empress as a representation, yes, of where we stand with our acceptance and our love.
Yeah, I guess it's like if we don't see the bigger picture or the purpose of something, then we kind of lose the reason why we need it or need to respect it or appreciate it, and then it kind of just deteriorates.
Yes.
And I think this happens within our relationships, it happens within our jobs, it happens within our domestic lives, within our spiritual path. Like so many times we want to just kind of tune out. Yes. It's just too much. We're overloaded. Why? Because we're just endlessly scrolling and tapping and swiping and just clicking and doing all kinds of stuff, and it's just, everything is just too much.
Yes.
It's sensory overload.
Yes.
And it's really hard to find the bigger picture in these sensory overload, aka details
100%.
Of reality, which, by the way, wouldn't you agree, is not all of reality.
I totally agree with that.
I mean, it's not even like 2% of reality.
No.
It's just like a part of reality that we need to be aware of, but it cannot dictate and navigate our lives.
But it does, and with like every generation that comes after, it will do more so. Because I know it's kind of tragic, but we read a study somewhere where it's like 95% of the kids in cities really think that burger comes just like from a shelf in the supermarket, and they have no idea that that's actually coming from cows.
No.
Yeah.
That's really intense. Okay, so then of course my biggest question now is, rather than how big does my picture need to be, how do I get a bigger picture?
Beautiful. Yeah, well, as like.
Okay, well let me ask.
No, I know how to answer it, but I don't know the classifier of how almost oversimplified the answer is. Because if I say get back to nature, then this sounds like John Muir Society. And that's really not what I mean. But I mean, get back to nature in a way that shows us who we are beyond those man-made sequences, and honest to God contemplation or meditation or some kind of honest to God spiritual path is really, really important, or call it a spiritual practice. But like a real one, not, don't get me wrong, I don't mean dancing naked in the moonlight when I say get close to nature, because that's really not at all being in that state that I call our natural state.
So, let me run this by you. Like maybe it's a good example or not, but one way that I love to get a bigger picture is to study history. I like to look at, in museums and to read and learn about what we have done, and different perspectives on different events that have happened. And is that kind of learning about human nature? Is this talking about like opening? Is this one way to get a bigger picture? Or do you mean like literally like with Mother Earth nature?
I think that in like my world, this cannot be separated.
Yeah,
I
I
think
felt like
like
that
if
too.
yeah, if I
Mm-hmm.
look at history, I also look at Mother Nature
Yeah, like how we
and
have
human
interacted with
nature,
the
and
earth
yeah,
and what we've done. Because Earth is a playing field to express love and life and
yes,
happiness and to see how we've interacted with that.
yes,
What we've done with these playing fields and the country, like the sequence of countries we've established and stuff like
yes,
that. But I think, like, as we're interacting with nature, I know that also just sometimes with myself, like, if I just look at a tree and I appreciate it for what it is, it really opens my mind. Like, wow, it awakens and sleeps every year, and like just this one little leaf is part of this whole system of trees, and
yes,
it's just so nice to think about. Or of course, with me and the stars, I like to look at the stars, and this is like a really obvious way. Or you look at the petal of a rose, or a grain of the sand, and you see how it's all part of a bigger system, and you say, oh my gosh, sometimes I'm just looking at this little handful of sand. Sometimes I'm looking just at this one little grain, and I'm forgetting that it's a beach that's on a shore that's,
yes,
part of a whole ecosystem of things.
yeah.
Or
So yes, I have nothing add to
so we can
that
start with the
because
bigger picture, just like by looking at the world around us
yes,
and kind of looking at more than what's being fed to us with our feeds,
yes,
but kind of like just discovering, what's called astrologically our third house, and then kind of moving on into new horizons from there.
beautiful,
From the third house to the ninth house, like
yeah,
which is like foreign lands and aliens and like anything foreign and alien to you. Maybe you try a different restaurant, or you go down a different street, or you
or you go at all,
or you go at
like you
all.
walk at all.
Yeah, that
I
you
mean, it's like I really, could not be dared to guess
mm-hmm.
how many people on an average day do, let's not say 10,000 steps, but five,
Yeah,
like
5,000 or 5 steps. Yeah, 5.
5,000.
Yeah, duh.
Because
Yeah.
five, you have to take from your door to the car. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but 5,000 steps, I'd be hard pressed to
Yeah,
guess how
yeah,
many
yeah,
people do
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh.
absolutely. So I think it's very interesting when you put it that way. Like you can expand your world just in the world, and then it'll open your mind,
Yes,
and then you have new experiences, and it's great to have familiar and your favorites and everything. But I think it's about going out of your comfort zone,
yes,
or also bringing people from outside into your favorites can also open your mind and create bigger worlds. Like sometimes we live in these small ecosystems that then we don't bring other people in. And sometimes when we're bringing other people in, it can open things up and make them bigger.
yes, it can.
So it's all about moving out of the comfort zone.
Because really, what you just described is to just have honest to God interactions.
Mm.
Like real face to face. And I know it's getting hard with the masks to have a full face experience with strangers, or
It's coming
people
back
that
though,
you.
like without the masks
But like we
for
do need
now.
that.
Mm-hmm.
We need
Mm-hmm.
that. Like
Mm-hmm.
to really have this a full-on connection.
Yeah.
Like a honest-to-God connection.
Not face-to-face through the screen, but face-to-face
face-to-face
with like sharing air and
yes,
sharing oxygen and like this intimacy, like
and be close
smell.
enough. Yes, I just wanted to say that be close enough to smell each other. I mean, even though sometimes, of course, we don't want that because we don't like the perfume the person standing next to us is wearing, or we don't like the body odor if there is no perfume, or maybe the person has stinky feet or bad breath. I mean, but this is all honest to God interaction.
Yeah.
And this honest to God all opens our minds. And
that's true. It opens our sense. It triggers the senses and it opens our minds and it puts us into new dimensions.
Yes.
And not just in 2-dimension.
Exactly, because imagine that I would be a person who hates to brush their teeth at night, which thankfully I'm not, but I've heard these people do exist. And then I'm standing at the supermarket and the person next to me like really has bad breath. And maybe it opens my mind to the fact that I say, no, I really don't want to be that person. I really am going to have better dental hygiene.
Yeah, it opens your mind.
And you may think this is like an inconsequential example, but it's not. All I'm trying to say is that these moments, they don't have to be these life-shattering, huge philosophical happenings or spiritual enlightenments. And they say, oh yeah, now I opened my mind, now expanded my awareness. No, it can literally happen anywhere with anything.
That's very, 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 very beautiful and very, it's very true.
There's nothing too trivial in nature. Like every tiny little thing or action has a purpose. Closing that circle. Now we're back to that.
Beautiful. And with that full circle, ora possiamo mangiare la pizza, bresaola, rucola, grani, stracchino e mozzarella di bufala.
That would be me, and I'm looking forward to it.
So, anyhow, thank you so much for this beautiful podcast. I'm really happy about it. And this has been Arik
and Aurelia.
And you've just listened to an episode of
Ageless.
We hope it's opened your mind and your world. And please share with anyone in your reality you think you can benefit from it. Talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Ciao.